Hello, everyone. I'm Edward Nguyen, your host for Collectibles and Coffee. Today is Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. My beverage of choice today is straight black coffee. Today, we'll be looking at the history of Magic the Gathering, one of the most popular TCGs. It's the one that's nearest and dearest to me. That's how I got my start doing all this. That's the one I'm most familiar with. We'll look back. It has a very long history, and we'll kind of break it down, look at the different eras of Magic, how they have changed over time, the dynamic of the game itself, in addition to the dynamic of the market, and how it slowly evolved from when it first came out to where we are today, depending on where you were in the buy-in process. Some of these may apply to you differently. Some people have been in this for a very long time, obviously. Some people might be new. There's a little bit of information here for everyone, so let's hop right in. Magic the Gathering came out in 1993. The first printing is known as Alpha. It is unique in the sense that it has more rounded corners than any other set. It's very distinguishable. It also had a very, very small print run. When the game first came out, Wizards of the Coast was actually publishing their print run size. We know that there are exactly 1,100 copies of every alpha rare in existence. That being said, a lot of copies have been attritioned over time. If you talk to some people who played Magic back then, Gen Con, one of the largest conventions for gaming, it's now held in Indianapolis. It used to be held in Milwaukee. I'm not quite sure where it was held back then. There are actually reports of people opening up starters of Alpha, booster packs of Alpha, which was released right before Gen Con, people playing the game and actually throwing them away. In today's market, even the commons, the cards that you find most frequently, even the basic lands, you can easily find them for $20 a copy for basics, depending on the condition. And some of the more popular commons are worth hundreds of dollars, especially if they're in nice, clean condition. During the early years, Wizards of the Coast, as previously mentioned, was providing us data on the size of their print runs. We know exactly how many copies of cards were printed during that era. 1,100 copies for alpha rares, not really that many, especially if you consider the fact that 1993, that was a long time ago, right? We're looking at 27 years of Magic at this point. A lot of copies have naturally been attritioned over time. There are probably copies in closets from people who have passed away or they're young. It's in an old house somewhere. They really haven't seen the light of day. A lot of these rares are really, really hard to find, especially in nice condition. We'll discuss a little bit more about what they look like on the market today. But a lot of these copies are highly sought after by collectors in terms of value, in terms of collectability, in terms of investment pieces. Again, simply because there's a fixed amount, we know there's no more copies entering the market. Sealed product is very, very difficult to find. There's not a lot of copies remaining of sealed alpha packs, of sealed alpha starters that have good provenance. I believe someone will have to help me on this one. I do not believe that packs of alpha starters and booster boxes were actually sealed. In the sense that boxes nowadays have a factory shrink wrap around them. One, it protects the box, and two, it provides as a basic measure against tampering. They all come with a stamp on the shrink wrap that indicates it was made by WotC, and it's an official product and it hasn't been opened. If we move forward a few years, we have a few more sets come out. Beta was the first set to come out after Alpha. It contained all the Alpha cards. There are some fixes. Volcanic Island, one of the dual lands that was printed, or that's part of the cycle of 10 dual lands, was not printed in Alpha. There's no such thing as an Alpha Volcanic Island. The Beta Volcanic Island is considered to be the most premium one you can get, the most expensive one you can get. As a result, you see that Beta Volcanic Islands are quite a bit more expensive than some of the other duels simply because you can't find anything that is nicer, more rare, or more expensive than a beta Volcanic Islands for duels. The biggest fix for beta was, as mentioned, they fixed some errors. It was a slightly larger print run once Wizards Coast saw that there was real legitimate demand for beta cards, for Magic the Gathering cards, and it showed that the game had some real legs on it. There was some life, there was a lot of interest in the game. This was before TCGs were prevalent. This is 1993. If you watched yesterday's video, Pokemon doesn't even exist yet. It won't exist for another 2 years. So Magic the Gathering was really the force on the market in terms of TCG. There was a lot of demand. It was very, very hard to keep this just product on the shelf for people, mainly because there just wasn't a lot of it. There was a lot of demand. People were wanting to get their hands on this and be able to play. It was a very, very classic derivative of your fantasy setting, as it were. You have, a lot of your classical Dungeons and Dragons type monsters. The fantasy setting was largely there. A lot of people found a way to bring their Dungeons and Dragons hobby into a very simple playable form that you could play with one other person. And I imagine that was how a lot of people who were playing Magic in the day, who had started to collect in this time era, that's really how they got their start. We would see some other sets continue to be reprinted over the years. The first expansion, Arabian Nights, also very popular at the time. It was originally going to have a different back, but that was something that they scrapped at the last minute. It is the first expansion pack for Magic, outside of the core sets, Alpha, Beta, Unlimited. Those were the core sets for Magic. Arabian Nights was the first of what we would consider an expansion in today's terms. The print run, also very short. It is very, very difficult to find sealed Arabian Nights product nowadays. A lot of the packs back then had an issue where they could actually be searched. So if you're looking to buy sealed product, you want to make sure that you're able to protect yourself. The most common thing for search packs is you can actually look at every card in the pack. All you do is you take your fingernail, you push the card towards the top, and you press down on the pack. And because the packs were transparent at the time, they had a very thin white plastic at the top. You could actually press down and you could see what cards were inside. You have a lot of people that will try and pass off packs as being unsearched. That may be true. They may not have searched for them themselves. If I were to have one, I may not be the one to search it, but I may not be able to provide you the provenance going all the way back to the sealed box. And I can't say with certainty that if I had a pack in my possession that it would be unsearched. Usually you can notice signs of people searching on the packs themselves. Again, if you look at it, you'll usually see some press marks, some fingernail marks, usually from where people push the cards up or where people press against the booster pack. You should be able to see very easily if it is a search pack. Again, you want to protect yourself. You want to make sure you're doing your due research. You want to be buying from reputable sources. I would say that if a source is able to provide the provenance of the pack, for this reason, a lot of people, when they buy a product, they keep invoices. If you see someone has an invoice that was dated, 1995 or something, or they kept a store receipt from 1995, you're probably buying a good product. A lot of this comes with experience. I've had a lot of big collections, a lot of expensive things come through. A big part of buying is that you develop a sixth sense, as it were. You're able to kind of feel out the person, see what they're coming from. If someone says, hey, I found this in my attic, and the person's like 20 years old, may not be the best story. It's unlikely that these things are just laying around. Usually most of these people you tend to see for older products, in my experience, when I'm buying them, they come from people who are approaching middle age at this point. You have to remember this was 27 years old. The game Magic the Gathering is 27 years old. If they were playing at Alpha, at Beta in 1993, 94, and they're 15 years old or something, 15, 20 years old, they're probably getting close to 50 at this point. Those are some of the people that their product is real. That's likely something they've had for a very long time. You see a fair amount of them looking to get out and maybe look at making some substantial life purchases. Those are the kind of people that generally, when you buy sealed product, when you buy these cards from, they're going to be real, and you don't have to worry about things like tampering, the cards themselves being counterfeit, etc. So that was kind of how Magic started. You can find a little bit more information about this elsewhere. We'll explore this at a later time. I'm trying to keep this relatively short and simple and more to the point about the market itself, and kind of give some context as to the biggest things that would slowly impact Wizards' decisions, and some of these decisions are things that we would feel today. The next major set we'll talk about is Chronicles. Chronicles was a reprint set. It means that there are no new cards in the set. Reprint sets are things that they'll continue to do up to this day. Reprint sets are, again, there's nothing new. There's no new cards. There's nothing fancy about them. It is simply a set that is full of reprints of cards that have already been printed, and they're reprinting them and jamming all these reprints into one set. So when Chronicles came out, Chronicles was the first real set that had no availability issues. They had massively overprinted the set. Everyone up to this point, if you were looking to buy sealed product, you were likely to have it severely allocated simply because they didn't print enough of these cards at this time. If you go back and look at data based on the print size of these sets, you'll discover that a lot of them are pretty small. There was more or less a slow linear increase over time from the first few sets. And then when we get to Chronicles, we'll see a massive spike in card availability. They printed just way more of these cards, and this upset a lot of people. Even though the cards themselves have a white border instead of the original black border that many of the original cards came from, most notably the Elder Dragon Legends from the Legend set. This would eventually go on to be a format in itself called Elder Dragon Highlander. Those Elder Dragons were one of the most sought after cards in the set at the time, just because they were cool, they're multicolored, they're legends. A lot of them would eventually have spawned their own storyline in the game. When Chronicles came out, these were all reprinted as white border cards with the original art themselves. This caused a lot of outroar among people who had been collecting since the beginning. The game is, I think Chronicles came out in 1995. Someone will have to fact check me there. But this was a big deal because people felt like their cards were being devalued. A lot of the people who had bought into the game had the expectation that the cards were limited and their cards would maintain value because they were supposed to be scarce. So eventually, in March 1996, Wizards would officially come out with a way to protect the value of the cards that collectors would buy. This is the first iteration of what we would know today as the reserve list. There have been countless articles, there's been a lot of words written over the years about the reserve list, but not that many people actually know how the reserve list started, the iterations it's gone through, the changes it's gone through to kind of get to where we are today. So, 1996, this is, again, in the wake of Chronicles. We are looking at cards that Wizards of the Coast is intent on preserving the value of. So if you look at the original iteration, it's much shorter. Cards have been added over time, but the original iteration actually contained cards from Alpha that would eventually be removed in the second iteration in 2002. If we look at January 7th, 2002, you can go back and look at the Wizards archive. There is an article written by Randy Buehler. The title is Re-Examining Reprints. One of the things he actually writes about in there is the commons, uncommons that are on the reserve list would be removed. The most notable ones are Demonic Tutor and Sinkhole. These two cards, pretty marquee cards. We still see them to this day. Sinkhole was a relatively basic card. It was an uncommon in Alpha. Very, very powerful. Demonic Tutor, probably one of the most marquee cards for Magic. A lot of people are able to identify with this card. They know this card. There's been a lot of controversy, mainly because the original printings contained art of a demon, art that would be changed later to include a pentagram, and that led to some controversy. People had concerns about Magic the Gathering dealing with the occult, satanic images, etc., which would, again, further be changed to not have the pentagram on it. We have seen multiple reprints of Demonic Tutor to this day, but the original copies from Alpha, from Beta, are still quite expensive because they contain that very, very iconic art that a lot of people do associate with when they think of a base card from Magic the Gathering. Anyways, discussion back to the article itself. To the, January 7th, 2002. Randy Buehler, he used to work extensively with Wizards of the Coast as a caster. He played extensively on the Pro Tour. He's a Hall of Fame member. He mentioned, very interestingly, something that Wizards actually does not acknowledge to this day, that Magic cards have monetary value and they are actually meant to be collectible. There's a line in the article that says that they are not looking to devalue the cards, which is the purpose of the reserve list. Again, look at the article. This is something that Wizards does not acknowledge to this day, in the sense that they cannot assign value to the cards themselves. In theory, every Magic card should have the same value. It is the value of a booster pack divided by the number of cards inside. This is simply to insulate them from legal issues that may arise from packs being considered gambling, right? We know this is a fine line. We can go into the semantics on this. Is it really gambling? Is it not, right? We have packs that people open. You can open up anything from, if you ever open a pack, you're most likely to get a bulk rare or sub-dollar rare, right? Your $3.99, $4.99 purchase, wherever you are. The packs have gone up in price over the years. Your most likely outcome is that you're going to end up with a pile of bulk, maybe like 30 to 40 cents tops. The flip side of this is your Chase Mythics. The most desirable cards in the set have value anywhere from 20, 30, 40. We've seen Wizards in more recent history, something that we'll discuss, continue to try and push the envelope on what they can really put inside packs. I'll delve into that a little bit more later, especially since a lot of the product is much more recent. But that was the first revision of 2002 to the reserve list itself. This is, I want to say 2002 was roughly around the time that Mirrodin had come out. So they have added more cards to the reserve list now. They have come out and said that anything up to Urza's Destiny has the potential to be on the reserve list. They made a list of those cards. This is 6 years since the original list was printed, so a lot of these cards have been added on. A lot of these cards have gotten more expensive as a result. We do see some quirky cards like Urza's Saga, Urza's Legacy, Urza's Destiny. A lot of oddball rares that do appear on the reserve list, but they also said that from this point forward, no additional cards would be on the reserve list. Anything Mercadian Mass or sooner is fair game. Anything from then on can be reprinted, has the potential to be reprinted. The cards on reserve list before that would not be. The final revision to the reserve list, and the one we are operating on today, would come on March 8th, 2010. The biggest stipulations here were that foils were not originally covered on either of the two iterations of the reserve list. They would now be included. This was coming off of the tails of some products that were a little bit controversial at the time. The biggest ones being a product that we used to call From the Vault. They were very small box sets. They were kind of sold as a premium item to collectors. They contained 15 to 20 cards. Most of them contained 15. And they were all thematic. They all had, the very first one was From the Vault Dragons. It would contain some of the most iconic cards in Magic's history. That were dragons, and they would be included, some of them with a special foiling process. Some of these cards had never come in foil before. So it was a pretty big deal when these came out, and people saw this as some of these cards that had never been foil, they would get new art or a new foiling process. What got them into hot water and what was eventually lead to some issues, and probably what led to this policy being created, was we started to see things like From the Vault relics, which most notably contained Mox Diamond. Mox Diamond, Stronghold rare, very, very powerful card, played in Legacy, played in Commander nowadays. Only one printing. It was on the reserve list prior to this, and now it comes with a new foiling process. And some people are starting to wonder, is this a violation of the reserve list? At what point, it's technically a reprint, but the reserve list didn't cover reprints. Similar product at the time, Dual Decks. These little... it was a box product. It contained 2 decks. It was A versus B. Again, very thematic. The first one was Elves versus Goblins. We've seen some Planeswalkers do a dual deck. We have Elspeth versus Tezzeret. A lot of these things, again, very thematic. The one that created the controversy here was Phyrexia versus the Coalition. It contained a copy of Phyrexian Negator. It's on the reserve list. No foiling existed before this, and it is on. It was a rare in Urza's Destiny, I believe. The box product itself, you could buy this. I think these had an MSRP of $19.99 at the time. Contained a full Phyrexian Negator. Phyrexian Negator would also be printed as a Judge promo. Is this a violation of the reserve list? That was what a lot of people were asking. At what point can you really draw the line? Do we just kind of get around the reserve list? Is it possible that we would print a Black Lotus in foil, technically not violating the reserve list, because the policy doesn't cover it? So the final revision, March 8th, 2010, foils cannot be reprinted on the reserve list. That is a violation of the spirit of the reserve list. You can't, going forward, these cards are on the reserve list, would not be reprinted. There's a small subset of foils. Most of them are judge foils. A lot of them have recently exploded in price because they are the only way to get some of these cards, as mentioned, in foil if you don't want the original printing. Survival of the Fittest is one. Their Demon Tutor, not on the reserve list, but it had a very, very expensive judge foil at the time. It has actually been remade recently as another judge foil. Wheel of Fortune, on the reserve list, has a judge foil that's quite expensive. Yawgmoth's Will, same boat. These are all cards that, when these judge foils were being made, judge foils were kind of in its infancy. This was product that was given to judges as compensation for judging events, usually bigger premier events like Pro Tours, Grand Prix, some of these premium level events at the time. This would create issues down the line. Again, we can't really say that there is monetary value attached to these cards, so you can't really say that you're trying to compensate someone with these cards that should have no monetary value for something that they're doing for you. Whole separate issue that's caused a lot of legal issues over the years. That's something that we can explore at a later time. But those judge foils definitely have a premium. They definitely are very attractive to a lot of people. A lot of people who play Cube, who have all foil cubes, they tend to seek these cards, again, because these cards are all very powerful. They're all very iconic. They don't really have a lot of foil versions. So if you want to foil out your cube, you're basically looking at buying these foils. So 2010, this is the final iteration of the reserve list. We have it written in stone, as it were. And this, for more or less, would kind of shape what the Magic market looks like in this decade, in the 2010s. If we start looking at the game of Magic itself, not looking at the market, but looking at the actual game, we can start to see where Magic starts to pick up, where it's slowly transitioning away from being kind of that nerdy hobby that's relegated to, you know, people in the corner at your local game store. Now it's really starting to pick up. It's starting to pick up a lot of steam. The market is growing. Demand is growing. If we look at 2012, or I'm sorry, 2011, that's the introduction of Modern. Wizards has realized that the game has gone so big at this point that they now break it up into a format that uses only the Modern card frame. If I can grab some examples off my desk here. This is an example of, this is a graded beta card. This is the original card frame for Magic from when it was printed up in 1993 up until the printing of 8th edition in 2001. And then in 2011, they would draw a line, they would cut off and said that cards that have the Modern card face, which is what I'm showing here, this is what we're looking at today, any cards that would be reprinted, or that would be printed with this card face, would now be in the Modern format. Since 2001, all those cards going back from 8th edition up until now are included in Modern. And as a result, there's a whole new format. The first major one that's changed since the beginning, there were some iterations. People have been playing Standard. That's the most common one, the most recent number of sets. Legacy, which was then known as Type 1.5. The only difference between 1.5 and Type 1, which we now know as Vintage, was that the cards that were restricted in Type 1, your Power 9, your Soul Ring, some of your big hitters, were instead banned in 1.5. Eventually, 1.5 would shift away. They would create the format called Legacy, and it would kind of adopt its entire identity due to a completely separate ban list just from what Type 1 was at the time, because at that time there's kind of an overarching feeling that Type 1.5 was nothing more than Type 1 light, as it were. So with Modern, August 12th, 2011, that was the announcement. They would change the next Pro Tour to be Modern, and this is when Modern starts to really, really pick up speed. Anyone who had picked up the game recently are starting to feel that they are really aged out from the people that had been playing from the beginning. If you had picked up Magic in 2010, right, the game is at this point is already 17 years old. There's a lot of people who are getting in that may not be alive at the time of when Magic was first printed. From here, we really start to see events explode in terms of popularity. We have a lot of record setters in terms of attendance. This was something that coverage always made a very big deal out of, because these events were really starting to get big. It was becoming a big deal to go to these events. They were picking up a lot of popularity. The first real one of note, I can choose from plenty of examples, but the one that kind of, in my mind, really took it to the next level, as it were, was Charlotte in 2012. This was a limited Grand Prix. This was, I believe, it was Gatecrash Limited. It set a record at the time of 2,672 people. I wasn't there myself, but I remember watching Star City. Kind of leading up, Star City was actually the tournament organizer for this event. People were really excited to get to this because they did something called the Gold Rush. I believe every attendant got a sealed, it was just a small envelope sealed card. It probably looked something like this. This is an example of, this is actually a Pokemon promo. This is how they're distributed in Japan. It was this inside, and Star City Games had actually promised that they would give away one card from the very early expansions. I believe there's Unlimited Power in there. They had a full set of Legends, Arabian Nights, etc. This was a big deal at the time. You have to remember that this was 2012, 8 years ago. A lot of the cards hadn't really seen big explosions in prices yet. But this was still a big deal. It was something that people were excited for. You can hear a lot of horror stories from people who played. A lot of people didn't get their pools until like mid-afternoon. The tournament ran very, very late into the day. This was just due to sheer size. This was actually before they had implemented the policy that there was no Saturday morning registration. This event actually allowed people, back then at these events, you could actually show up in person at 8 a.m. on Saturday and sign up, and you'd still be able to get in. That's something that they've obviously done away with, but that was something that was available at the time. And again, this is just, in my mind, this is kind of the beginning. There are a lot of events that would be, wow, this is record setting. This is a big deal in terms of attendance. These were great milestones. This was showing that Magic was really starting to boom. People were really excited about these things. Las Vegas, the very first one. This would be another reprint set. Modern Masters, the first printing of Modern Masters, 2013. That was 4,500 people. Las Vegas would kind of become a marquee event over the next several years, just in terms of size, and it would be a celebration of Modern Masters, of these reprint sets being reprinted. 2015 was the second iteration, Modern Masters 2. This was one where they actually branched out. There were 3 events held on the same weekend. One was in Chiba in Japan, one was in Utrecht, the Netherlands, and then, of course, Las Vegas in the US. All 3 of these events held on the same weekend, celebration of Modern Masters 2, big events everywhere. The smaller ancillary events, as it were, it was an answer to how can we make these events not just be completely out of control. Las Vegas had 7,500 players for the main event. The other 2 had 35 to, I think, 3,800. These are big events at the time. And you think about the issue of scale, how difficult it is to find a place that can hold this amount of people is truly mind-boggling. I remember just being in Vegas for 2015. I've been to most of the Vegases. 2015, it was just a massive amount of people in that room. It was like truly mind-boggling. If you can imagine what 7,500 players look like, you have to remember that at 7,500 players, you're not counting the amount of staff that's required to run the event. You're not talking about judges. You're not talking about people who are simply there that are not playing the main event, that are there for side events. It's really a mind-boggling number, and that really shows how big Magic had gotten. Events of that size were, outliers, but it was still pretty common to see events that would have 2,000 plus people. Prior to 2010, 2,000 people was largely unheard of. Most events were in the 1,000 to 1,500 range, depending on, the city, how easy it was, how much people liked the format. All these things would largely affect the attendance. But now, 2014, 2015, 2016, we're really starting to see 2,000 person events become commonplace. Some cities that had never seen an event of this size, we're starting to see them. We're starting to see more Magic events per year. Every passing year, Wizards was continuing to add Grand Prix to more and more places as the game became more and more popular. Legacy was really starting to take off at this point in terms of the format. Star City was probably a big actor in this because they ran their own tournament series analogous to Wizards of the Coast Grand Prix. They ran their own open series, which, again, same idea. They would go to a different city every weekend. They would host these big events, big tournament. They were open. Anyone could play. And it was really starting to draw attention to a lot of these formats, mainly because they were wanting to push Legacy. And Legacy is, as mentioned, it used to be 1.5, Vintage Light, or Type 1 Light, whatever you want to call it. It started to develop an identity of its own, and people started to really, really get into the game at this point in terms of people who had old cards. A lot of these cards had long since rotated out, and Legacy is giving them a chance to play, especially play with some of the more broken strategies that they may not be able to play in Standard or Modern. people started to buy dual lands. Dual lands started to slowly creep up in price. A lot of these cornerstone cards that are very popular and very needed for the format started to get really expensive. Dual lands was when they were starting to pop up in price. The demand for the game had created a large following for modern cards. Modern cards, in turn, people would buy them. They would get expensive because reprints weren't as prevalent as they are today. You have to remember that from the first reprint set in Modern Masters 2013, we didn't see another Modern Masters for 2 years. And then the next one after that wouldn't be until 2017. We were starting to see these large gaps in time where, okay, if a card was reprinted in 2013, it may not be reprinted in 2015. But from 2013 to 2015, that's a lot of growth in a relatively small amount of time, and we're looking at a pretty big difference in terms of card availability from 2013 to the demand that's needed for players in 2015. And that's not even counting the reserve list, which we talked about at the beginning of the episode. The reserve list, these cards, people know that there's no chance of reprinting these. Some of their most powerful iconic cards, these dual lands, cornerstone, almost every legacy deck needs to play them. These are starting to get really expensive. We look forward to 2018. This is 2 to 3 years at this point. Magic is still booming. Magic has done very well. We see the first real major outside influence into the Magic the Gathering market. This is when cryptocurrency had its real big time in the spotlight. Cryptocurrency had exploded in price. We all have our stories, but for people that had bought at its low, right? You have to remember that when Bitcoin came out in 2009, these were fractions of a penny. It had gone through some boom bust cycles. If you look back, there's a lot of hilarious stories of people selling at Bitcoin at $4,000 per Bitcoin. Depending on when you got in, if you had got in early 2018, you could buy it from $3,000 to $4,000. But by the end of 2018, we were looking at a huge boom. There was the biggest one, the huge spike. It was just at $20,000. And then from there, you had a lot of people who became crypto millionaires. These people, a lot of them, they started to look for a place to move their money rather than sell crypto directly for money and use that money to buy cards. There was a market for people to trade their cryptocurrency directly into cards themselves. So a lot of these people who had purchased a cryptocurrency for a fraction of the price, they had now gained a ton by trading out of their cryptocurrency into cards themselves. At that point, this is when we see reserve list cards really spike. As a result, everything was getting expensive. A lot of these cornerstone cards, Tabernacle, Dual Lands, Power, these were all getting more and more expensive because if we look at real life economics, it's very, very simple. Once one form of currency or one form of asset becomes inflated, becomes heavily hit by inflation, other assets start to become more valuable as a result. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But in this case, people who had modern cards that were getting expensive, or people who were ahead of the curve and own these cards, were looking to trade them into reserve list cards. These cards had spiked, dual lands, Tabernacle, Power, etc. And as a result, because people were able to trade a lot of small cards for one big card, it was causing these big cards to spike as a result. Because before, if we look at, a basic transaction, if you're, we'll use a real life example. If $1 buys you 3 apples, and that's been the case for a while, now all of a sudden $1 can buy you 5 apples, right? All of a sudden, either apples need to get more expensive or the dollar has to be valued less. And in this case, we know that in the case of reserve lists, you can't just get more apples. There's a finite amount of apples. So what does it do? It causes apples to become more expensive. Your $1, your small cards before that you're able to trade into this, your $1 may only buy you 1 apple now because of how expensive the cards have gotten. And because the cards continue to increase in price, a lot of these cards have slowly gone a little bit cheaper over time, but it has shown that reserve list cards are the real deal. The fact that there's a finite quantity on them, Wizards has held steadfast to the reserve list policy, their reprint policy on these cards not being reprinted. These cards have continued to increase over time. They have regressed a little bit from that high, right? Nothing is sustainable at that price. Bitcoin has gone back. We've seen cryptocurrency regress a little bit. A lot of these reserve list cards have gone back as a result. But cards, for the most part, are still getting more expensive. 2019, there's a big milestone there. PWCC, a consignment company that sells primarily high-end sports cards, Magic cards, all kinds of trading cards and hobby items through eBay. Their premier auction, I want to say it was in August, was a BGS 9.5 Alpha Black Lotus. This is the card to have in Magic the Gathering. This is, your rookie Michael Jordan card. This is your first edition Charizard. Everyone realistically knows that Alpha Black Lotus, this is what you're looking for. There's one of 1,100 copies. A lot of them have probably been destroyed. You're probably not going to find one that's going to be this nice on the market that's available. Are there copies that are this nice? Of course. Are there copies that are graded that are this nice? Of course. Are there copies this nice that are graded, that are on the market, that are for sale publicly? Probably not. So the auction closed at $166,000. That was probably a little bit lower than what some people were expecting, but this was still, again, a huge boom at the time. This was just drew a lot of attention. Now you're starting to draw the attention of people outside looking in that are thinking, okay, what's going on? Like, why is this drawing so much attention, and why is this one piece of cardboard so expensive? Right when we think of things that are $166,000 in today's market, $166,000 goes pretty far. If you're in the market to buy a house, if you put down $150,000 down payment, right, you're buying yourself. If you can afford to do that, you're basically putting a down payment on a mansion at that point, or some small mainstream house in California, depending on where you live. $166,000 is a very, very high-end car, right? That's more expensive than most commercial cars on the market. You're probably looking at a sports car at that point, an exotic car. Right, $166,000 in an asset is something that's pretty unheard of. And now we're looking at $166,000 in something that I can carry in my hand and hold and walk around with. PWCC will continue to do well. They've been under some scrutiny. Graded cards have been under some scrutiny as well. That's a topic for their episode. There's probably going to be an episode entirely on graded cards in the future. They're a very, very big deal. A lot of people have a lot of interest in them. They're very, very interesting in terms of how different they are and kind of the effect they have on the market. Well, that's 2019. If we forward to today, March, pandemic hits. Originally, people's instinct, people's intuition, and I don't fault anyone for this, people said that Magic cards would start to lose a lot of value very quickly. I mean, it makes sense, right? Everyone's in lockdown. You can't go down to your local game store and play at Friday night. A lot of big events stopped happening. This was when Grand Prix, they announced the cancellation of basically all Grand Prix for the remainder of 2020. This is a big deal, right? If you can't play cards in person with a friend, why would I need to be owning physical cards? Why would I want to drop hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on cards or a deck if I can't play in person? That being said, as we looked, and as at the beginning, this did happen. A lot of people, especially for those who are tied up on money, you saw a lot of people trying to fire sale their collection. People were looking to get out as quickly as possible. A lot of people saw this as the catalyst that I have a bunch of cards. If I can't play with them, they don't mean anything to me. They have no value to me. The value I got out of Magic, besides the monetary value itself, was being able to play with my friends, being able to play at events and compete. If I can't do that, I'm out. I'd rather have this money, maybe it goes towards paying my rent for the next few months, or any real life purchases, or maybe people just need a reason to get out. I saw the full spectrum of reasons, and cards were being bought at that time. And then against what people expect, cards actually started to rise in price. A lot of people found a way to continue to play Magic. If you look on Facebook, there's a lot of groups that will discuss groups that play via webcam, via Zoom meetings. I've seen some very elaborate setups where you can have a 4-player game of Commander of EDH with 4 different people all in their own home with a very elaborate webcam setup that takes an image straight down onto their table, more or less kind of an over-the-top view, similar to what we see for Magic coverage, for TCG coverage. And by doing this in a Zoom meeting, it's actually allowing them to be able to play with their friends. As a result, cards have gone expensive. If we look towards May, it's really we start to see, this is kind of when all hell breaks loose, as it were. We see a massive surge. This is when the stimulus check of $1,200 drops. A lot of people, most Americans that make under $75,000 will be getting this. And now all of a sudden, people are just buying. We see this in collectibles market. It's very, very well documented. If you look at the past PWCC auctions, if you look at just a lot of hobby stores, even though these stores are not able to be open, to be able to sell physically in person, to have events in person, people are buying. People are buying entertainment just across the board. Video games have done very well. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a shortage on Switches. A lot of stores were selling them. If it was a secondhand store, people were selling them well over MSRP. A lot of the big box stores, Walmart, Best Buy, a lot of these places, they simply could not keep Switches in stock. And in terms of the hobby industry, a lot of people were starting to buy up these hobbies that perhaps they are rediscovering them. So people are able to go through, clean up their house. They discover old Pokemon cards, old Magic cards. They want to know more about them. People are starting to go out and buy them. A lot of people that are at home, they can't go out and eat, right? So if you have a budget to go out and spend dinner eating out every week or however often, you can't eat out anymore. So you have this extra money that's sitting there. Maybe you have a vacation planned. That got canceled. That can't happen. Okay, you have a bunch of money back. Now what? You're stuck at home. You're working from home. You can't go out. You can't really do anything. What are you going to do? People are buying. People are just buying everything. Ironically, a lot of things that people are buying are things that are larger items that line up well with your $1,200 stimulus check. You saw a lot of people building new computers. $1,200 gets you a very, very nice custom computer that probably allows you to play games in today's on today's market, probably well above average. People were buying up dual lands. People were buying up pieces to finish their decks. We saw a lot. Personally, I saw a lot of cards and components for Commander decks being sold because, again, there's no tournaments, there's no big events happening, so people are wanting to buy decks that they can play with. But we see this across the board. Pokemon has done well. Magic has done well. Even things like comics. Comics have done well. Sports cards have done well. These are all things that people were buying because they had the extra expendable income and wanting to put their money in something. And if we think forward, I'd mentioned earlier in the episode that people have to find a way to counter inflation. If you're sitting on a lot of money, well, when you have $1,200 going out to every American that makes less than $75,000 a year, that is a massive, massive amount of money that's being injected into the U.S. economy. So if you're holding on to the U.S. dollar at that point, that's we're looking at inflation, right? There's a lot more money, right? People are gonna find a way to park their money. A lot of high-end collectibles have become more expensive. Again, part of that is people looking to rediscover their hobby. There's probably some amount of organic buying, but now you have people that have money. They're looking for a place to park their money because holding on to U.S. dollar isn't really doing you that much good, especially when you have a lot of people who are getting more money now. So we've seen collectibles continue to go up in price. I said this yesterday for buying Pokemon. Anyone who wants to buy what they what they like to collect, I would do so now. Magic, largely the same way. We have seen reprints. We recently saw Double Masters being reprinted as one of the reprint sets for Magic this year. This was after a brief hiatus. Before this, the last Master set we saw was Ultimate Masters in December 2018. So it's been a little while since they've done a reprint set, and Double Masters was something that a lot of stores did very, very well with. There's a lot of very cool reprints. Again, reprint set. No new cards, only reprints. There's a lot of cards that have not been reprinted in quite some time. The goal of reprint sets, we have to remember, is to get these cards that have been out of print for quite some time into the hands of players. But that being said, there is a second layer to this. When cards get super cheap, that's when there is a huge surge of people wanting to buy. If we look at a card that was, $50, nice round number. There's plenty of cards that are $50. That's a lot of money. When a card gets reprinted, people expect to see a reprint. The card will drop in price, right? The reprint is accessible. There's a huge supply that's entering the market. Probably even more so than the original printing of the card itself. A huge supply entering the market. It's not accessible for people, right? If this $50 card, for example, drops down to $10 in Double Masters, people are going to start buying, right? Anyone who wanted it at $50 is going to snap it up at $10. All right. Well, there's only a finite copy. There's only a finite number of copies out there, and there's probably more copies on the market. There's less copies on market than what people want to buy. So what happens when the $10 copies go? You start listing them at like $10.50. You start listing them at $11. You start seeing them at $11.50. As these cheap copies slowly start to dry up, the cards will raise in price. We see this time and time again. It's not always the most intuitive thing, because whenever people think of a reprint, they think of a card dropping in price. But as more and more people are buying these cards, especially if we're looking at another round of stimulus checks, for example, what's going to happen when people get another $1,200 and people start going out and buying these cards again? We're just only going to see these cards go up in price as more and more people are wanting to buy with the money they have. So here we are today, right? This is September 2020. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. Double Masters is a little more than a month old at this point. We're going to see some new sets drop. So people ask, what can I do with my money at this point? In terms of Magic Gathering, if you're looking to play, if you are a player, I would look at buying your cards now. If you probably don't want to wait, on cards. Because one, we don't know what the next reprint cycle looks like. A lot of changes in Wizards policies have made it a little bit iffy. You start to see a lot of product in terms of Secret Lair. There's your typical packs. Double Masters was the introduction of VIP boosters, $100 premium box product that contained a small subset of cards you could only find inside VIP boosters. All these cards would be, in my mind, they're pretty cheap right now. I think there will be a point in the future when they will be more expensive, mainly because a local game store that's looking to, make ends meet, that's trying to hit their threshold for sales or quota sales for a month, they can't afford to stay on product. So every store that ordered Double Masters, they're looking to either sell Double Masters, sell booster packs, sell the boxes, sell the VIP boxes, or if they're opening them, they need to have them listed right away and turn around and be selling them. But again, as those stores start to dry up, we're not seeing a lot of new copies enter the marketplace. One of the avenues for stores to buy in person, not every store is buying in person right now. A lot of stores, that's not something that they do. And Grand Prix, big events where you have people coming from all over the world. You have players selling off their excess stock to vendors being able to sell it. Vendors get the money from that. They go to another event. They buy cards from players. We had the cycle that's been abruptly broken. And now we don't really have a good way to restock, to get more supply. In addition, you have to remember that cards that are being released today, Double Masters, if it was released in July, this had been printed a long time ago. Zendikar Rising, that's coming out in at the end of the month, it's not being it's not being printed right now. Printing is already done. All these boxes are all sitting in warehouses, ready to ship out to distributors. So any changes in policy that they had made in anticipation of the pandemic was made months ago. So what are we seeing? We're actually seeing a shortage. A lot of hobbies, a lot of store owners are actually reporting that there's a smaller, shorter print run on these products compared to the past. And again, that's these companies trying to hedge against the pandemic. They had intentionally printed less. Again, operating under same intuition, under same expectation that pandemic, less people going to less hobby shops, we're going to sell less product. These decisions that they made way back in March and April are probably going to be what we're seeing right now. And with a shortage of product, that means that prices are just going to continue to go up. A lot of stores reported that they got way less VIP than they had wanted. They had gone less double masters than they wanted. The product sold very well for the people that did want to buy. And a lot of stores are just out of stock. So if you're looking to buy, I would not wait. I would buy right now. We'll touch a little bit more on the reserve lists in a later episode, but we've already seen cards. I used Guy's Cradle as my example yesterday. Guy's Cradle went from being $350 to $400. It spiked up to $1,000 previously. It has regressed a little bit from its high, but now we're still looking at $700, $600 Guy's Cradles, which is 50% more than where they were back in May. There's a lot of cards. If you want to look at individual cards, you want to look at their price history, you will see a lot of cards, the cards that are in demand, the cards that are popular, the cards that people want to play with, have seen nothing but a slow and steady price increase since the beginning of the pandemic. March, April was a little bit more steady. May was when we really start to see cards get expensive. And then depending on the availability of the cards themselves, some cards have seen a massive price correction. When I was discussing the reserve list earlier, we mentioned Judge Foils. A Judge Foil Survival of the Fittest was very, very steady in price. It's a gorgeous card. The art is incredible. This was a card that was steady in price, $500, $600, $700 for solidly the past year. It was, if you saw people selling them, they were basically on that price range. Nothing, it was just not going up, it was not going down, it was just very, very steady. Supply has pretty much completely dried up on that card, and now you're looking at over $1,000 for that foil. That's just an example. It's there's a lot more examples out there. I could go on and on. I have to keep content for a future stream, so that's why I'm not going to delve into full details today. I've already gone deeper than what I wanted in terms of just a basic way for people to get into the market. But that being said, if you're looking to get in, I would buy right now. We'll go into more details about the things that I think you should be buying in a later episode. So that'll just kind of wrap up kind of the history of Magic, the background. I wanted to talk about the reserve lists, and then just kind of some context that led us to where we are today. With that said, you can find me on Twitter at Edwin13. You can find Vermilion on the social media channels listed on the right. You can find us on TCG Player and eBay. And then tomorrow, assuming logistics work out, we will have a special guest with us. He will go into detail about grading cards. We'll talk a little bit more about grading cards. That's something that a lot of people have questions about. It's kind of a weird market. It's not the easiest one to tap into. But he'll be here. Hopefully he'll be able to answer some basic questions. We'll look at the market on graded cards, how to get cards graded, what grading cards mean, and more with the interview tomorrow. Wherever you are in the world, be safe out there. We're in some tough times. This is Edwin.